I just know you're going to love the guests that we have on in this episode, so don't go away. Welcome back to the interview. I'm Dr. Rick Wadge. We're going to do a second part with Scott Baland. Scott, you have been on a journey, and it was a journey I would give the synopsis of being from post-reformational, typical Christian guy to now kind of a super Christian.
Well, I hate to, burst your bubble, but it's even more radical than you think, because I didn't tell this in the first episode, which is I started out as a Catholic.
Okay.
And
that's a further journey.
Yeah. So my journey was way more radical. That questioning began in my teens. And, I really wanted to defend the Catholic Church because they are, the one true church, as they say, with popes all the way back to Peter, and things like that. Well, I researched, I first studied from their viewpoint, and I did this on my own. I had drifted away where I wasn't going to study through them, but I was going to study their own material. And so I did it from their viewpoint, which was definitely defensive of their position.
Sure.
But after that, I wanted to also study it from a non-Catholic, viewpoint. So I did that, and I just really began to question everything. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I've got to read the Bible. And so that was part of what led me to first read the Bible is that kind of wondering how all that was. I had family that was praying for me a lot. My grandparents were praying for me, and because I was
Catholics?
No, they were they were Bible Christians.
Okay.
Independent Bible churches, which theologically is probably Baptist.
Okay.
Baptist based. And so that set of grandparents prayed for me all the time. And I know that looking back, they didn't really always say, I'm praying for you because you're a Catholic. They didn't do that. But they prayed for me, and they had literature around that I would pick up and look at.
Okay.
And then when my grandparents died, their mailing address was somehow forwarded to me. And I began to they had this every 2-month Jewish Christian magazine that they had been receiving for a number of years. And so it began to come to me.
Huh.
And so I thought, wow. And it came to me for a couple of years without any renewal fee or anything. I began to pay for it after that. But I just absorbed all that. And over my journey, I probably have studied or listened to or heard sermons from probably 50 different Messianic type teachers.
Wow.
And I wouldn't just listen to one or two. I mean, everybody from, don't know how to say it exactly, but Arnold Fruchtenbaum.
Oh, sure. Fruchtenbaum, yeah.
And just Zola Levitt, like I've mentioned before, and just, Jeffrey Seif, and just
brilliant teacher.
The guys, everybody that they have on GLC, plus a bunch of others that I just really can't even think of right now. But I wouldn't, I would listen or study like generally at least 6 to 10 of what they taught, episodes or lessons or whatever. And in some cases, 30 or 40 lessons. First Fruits of Zion, a lot of their material.
Wow.
And I did that before I plugged into Torah Club. Mm-hmm. I watched probably all of their episodes that they had on GLC. And a lot of the visitings, a lot of the times that they came to visit on the longer episodes, the interview episodes.
Yes.
So I'm familiar with them. I was already familiar with them before I began to be plugged into Torah Club, and right now that's my focus is what they are teaching. But I still am studying a lot of other independent things.
There's great materials out there. There's also pretty horrible material out
Yeah.
there, and it's one of those things where you want to guide and direct folks. Some of the, you just mentioned that the study that we're in together, at least one of those two, we're going through First Fruits of Zion material, which, by the way, I mean, I'm just going to tell you, I personally think it's one of the best conservative messianic commentaries and materials that you're going to find. And you can pick that up at ffoz.org. And I'm just pushing that because it is just so balanced. And it's just been such a blessing in my own life. And I've used it to teach in for several years in congregations. So,
Well, I've been, if I could do a shameless plug here for a minute, I've been a member long enough now with them to where I've received 2 quarterly journals. And as I read through these journals, I'm just underlining things. I go back and look, man, I underlined everything. And I go, I need to order another one that I can loan to somebody,
Right.
because it's just
it is.
I'm just amazed at the teaching. And so,
Now, do you have the newer bound books? I have the big set, when they were in binder form.
well, I just started receiving those.
Okay.
And I received one volume set of those. And so I will grow that library. I definitely intend to.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And the Vine of David is another great resource. And that's where you find people like Liechtenstein and some of those that were, I guess, late 1800s, early 1900s.
Right.
That were really formative thinkers in this movement of getting back to the Jewishness of the scriptures. And so you can pick that. I think it's
.org or
Probably, yeah.
probably
So,
org.
Yeah, and again, this is an arm of First Fruits of Zion, and so it's very, very good materials. And I've read several of those, and it's amazing stuff.
Yeah.
So this has been an infomercial for First Fruits of Zion, but it is that good of material. There's a lot of great individual published books that have come out recently on recovering the Jewishness of the scriptures.
Right. And you never know what somebody's going to discover first. And you said, just the general person out there. There are movements within traditional churches to have like somebody that's going to teach the Torah, and so usually they get assigned this little back room and they discover really quickly that these classes fill up. And they go, wow, we have to expand this. And so I've been a guest at certain churches where their study in that respect has really grown to like a couple of hundred people every week. And I think that's pretty amazing. But you said something a while ago too that I think is very important, and that is the being careful of error, of dangerous teachings, because I have learned in my long journey, I've been seduced, a time or two, and I discovered in time I thought, well, man, I'm glad I didn't plug into that with the real group, and like I would encounter their teachings, like little booklets or something. And I was saying, well, it makes sense, it looks pretty good, and I'm thinking, and I would, listen or read more and more of it. And I thought, well, the Lord looked after me, because I also had an interest in studying cults, and I studied cults really hard for probably 5 or 6 years. And I just had an open mind with the study of the cults to where maybe you shouldn't believe everything that you hear. And so I learned that I was going down a path I shouldn't have gone down. And that taught me to be very careful. And even in this movement that we're in now, the Jewish roots of the faith, like you mentioned, there's nothing that's totally the same normative throughout all movements of this. Just like you can't say that everybody that is a Protestant believes the same thing.
Right.
There are 1,000 different denominations of Protestantism.
Right.
And the same thing goes with Jewish roots of the faith here.
Right.
So there are extremes, but the more you study, the more you actually stay in the Word yourself and not just what people say about the Word, then you're going to have a better safety net.
Well, I agree with everything you said. Absolutely. And it leads me to the next conclusion, and that is that everybody needs a rabbi. Now,
Yes.
that's really hard for us to be able to pull off in this generation, in this culture, and especially with as you're talking about. And there's even a difference between the Hebraic roots movement and the Jewish roots movement.
Yeah.
Some of this can, they only want to go back to the time of the Mosaic writings, but there's a difference between that time period than there is in the first century. And so in the first century is where we're studying under our rabbi, which is Yeshua ben Yosef, Jesus, the son of Joseph. And so, him being Messiah, him being the chief rabbi, we want to understand things from his perspective. Well, that's first century.
Yes.
So if we only go back, only forward as far as the time of Moses and Joshua, then we're not looking at the phraseology. We're not looking at the idioms that are used and what that meant at the time of Yeshua, of Jesus. And so I think people get caught up in these things. And like you're saying, they get easily pulled off the track. So my point is, we need to find somebody to study under, and maybe a group of people that will help us stay on track.
Yes.
And one of the things that, we're going back to an infomercial again, but one of the things that First Fruits has done that I really appreciate is that they're trying to, and I think they're doing it, putting these groups together that meet weekly, these Torah clubs, but having a sense of kind of monitoring and watching over and guiding. And we do that with a video and a little more, I don't want to say controlled in a bad way, but a little more monitored. These are the key questions to ask and what to look for.
Right. And it also provides a sense of community and fellowship. Because a lot of people, which I was guilty of this too, I would just like self-study and just sort of become like reclusives, just study so much, that I would begin to avoid people. So not on purpose, but I really appreciate this, what you just mentioned, because Torah Club, because it does give us a chance to plug into a community of like-minded people, disciples, who are as interested in the studying as I am.
Yes.
And a lot of people they'll study like in Sunday school. They'll come to Sunday school and they'll study a week, 1 hour per week. And that just really doesn't, that's just boring. To me. That just really is unfulfilling.
I agree.
So, I can mention some kind of comment or not comment, but some kind of insight that I gained over the week and mention it in our group meeting, and other people will appreciate it.
Right.
And they'll want to talk about it or something. And so this is just, it feeds on itself, and it just, it just reminds me of what you read about in the Bible itself. People would just, talk about it all day long. You would teach your kids constantly as you walk, as you lay down, as you eat, the whole time you're learning. And, we are, as a culture, biblically illiterate for the most part. Even people that go to church, they know some, but they just, you could mention things to them and they may or may not know that was a biblical reference.
Right. Right. And along those lines, having been behind the pulpit for so many years, oftentimes people won't research it themselves, and they don't then know the truth from a lie. And so often what all they're hearing is, and what they're saying is, they're regurgitating what they heard from the pulpit, not necessarily from God's word. And that's dangerous, because I have to say, I look back and cringe over some of the messages that I gave.
Yeah.
That I kept all the MP3s, and cassettes and all that stuff. And I've gone back very infrequently and listened to a little bit, and I think, wow, I did my best at that time period, but I would completely disagree with what that young minister said.
Yeah. Well, one time I was giving a lesson to a group, and my emphasis was on the Jewish Hebraic roots, and they were mostly not familiar with that. And so I finished the lesson. A lot of people liked it. They said, "Wow, that's pretty interesting. I like that. Tell us more later." And so whenever I would have the opportunity to fill in, because I was just a fill-in teacher for a more regular thing at that time. And so later on, I realized I had made a mistake, but I was glad that they didn't know what I was talking about. So they didn't catch on to it, And I'm glad that I continued to find out where I was wrong.
Right.
Right. But something about exegesis, the biblical study of interpretation. The church nowadays, the Western church, the non-Jewish roots movement, they feel like the study of the Bible began in the 1500s with the Reformation.
Yeah.
And so they go, well, we've had teachers like that have studied this for 400, 500 years now. I go, well, yeah, but what about the ones that have been studying this for 2,500 years?
That were part of the culture in which they were writing.
Yeah. And so, I'm glad you're studying, the Bible, but you're missing out, and these people that began these studies 500 years ago with the Reformation and since then, they purposely discarded the previous teaching.
Yes.
And so they said, that's just, we don't need that. That's wrong. It's wrong to even consider. And, it's definitely, it leaves big gaps in everything that they do and teach.
And leads to a lot of misnomers.
Yeah.
And it's very, very sad. You're doing a show right now on Israel TV Network. There's a reason that we named this network Israel. And the term Israel from I would say from the prophets and time of Moses and time of the apostles, the disciples, is the same. And that is, it's not just one people group, but it's other people groups that are coming in and grafting themselves into that people group. They do not take the place of.
Right.
They don't call the shots.
Yeah.
And that's really important. But they're brought into that people group. So yeah, we're a part of Israel. Not physically. I wasn't raised with Jewish parents, a Jewish lineage. I didn't have ancestors die in the Holocaust. And that's really important to keep in mind. It's almost like there's a movement in the Hebraic roots movement that bothers me because, my introduction to this was coming through the Holocaust survivors, the survivors of the Holocaust. And so my respect for the Jewish people and their heritage and their culture and their traditions is gigantic. And there's a movement that's even taking place today that says the rabbis didn't know as much as we know. Their traditions, they didn't get it right. We're the ones who are going to set it straight. We have a better calendar. We have a better this. We have a better that. That is just disrespectful.
Yes.
And it's ignorant.
Well, the other thing about that is, a lot of those same people will say, well, blindness in part has come to the Jews, and so why should we believe anything that they say? Well, the other side of the coin is that blindness in big part has also come to the Christians, and the Christians who will reject that Jewish roots of that aspect of their
We
faith.
see through a mirror dimly.
Yes.
I totally agree. But I think the spirit behind it, Scott, is just wrong. It's arrogant. And I think when we come into the understanding that we didn't have all the answers, we thought we did, but we had a lot of things wrong. I think that coming in with a humbleness, a servant attitude of willing to learn all over again is essential for our spiritual well-being. essential. And when we don't think that, it's almost like we're coming into the Jewish basketball court and stealing the ball. And I just think it's wrong. And I don't think we'll progress spiritually with that kind of arrogant attitude.
And anyone who reads Romans 9 through 11, they're, on their own without being coached to read it wrong. It's impossible to read it wrong if you just read it yourself.
Right.
But people can be coached into misunderstanding that. But Romans 9 through 11 very specifically emphasizes what you just said. We are not the root. So it just, it's very humbling to realize, and we should realize that we aren't the root.
I think there's something about, and maybe I'm speaking just coming from a pastor's perspective, but there's something that was in me for sure of feeling like I had to have all the answers. And what I'm hopefully learning much better than I did before, and that is we're not going to have all the answers. We're not the fountain of knowledge. We learn every day. We correct mistakes hopefully every day. We're pushing toward being more like our rabbi. But we have to recognize that there are people that know more than we do or know something else that we didn't know.
Right.
And learn. And, Scott, that's what I am learning it means to be a disciple, a person who's learning.
Well, a lot of people can become arrogant in their own self-knowledge because they've studied a lot, and I could say I've done that too. But the more I learn now, the more I realize I know very little. You can read the Bible, 100 times, and some people have. But the more I read it, the more I realize I didn't catch that the first time.
Or you read it wrong.
Or I read it wrong. I go, I don't remember that. I've read the Bible a bunch, and I've never seen that before. And so a lot of times when I read the Bible, I will read it all the way through with the intention of reading it just through one aspect. Like I'm looking for all the things that would reference redemption, or all the things that would reference grace. And so I'll read it all the way through looking for examples of that.
Or how they viewed God.
How they viewed God. And as I've done that more and more, each time I go back through it, it adds layers to my understanding. And so I can then learn a new topic through the Bible quicker. The more you do it, the more it is easier to really go through the Bible.
Yes. Well, there's a lot we could talk about. Translations, maybe, because when people are reading through the Bible, if they're reading from a translation that has a bias that is not a Jewish bias, they're going to have to then refilter what they've read. Any suggestions?
Well, just try to grab a different Bible. What I would say, one thing that I'm encountering right now in the version that I'm reading, I'm not going to say the version of it, but it's a study Bible, and it is a Christian Bible and not a Jewish roots type Bible. But as I went through the Old Testament and read through all the notes, I was pretty much okay with it. It wasn't good enough. It really was not Jewish roots. It didn't explain a lot of that, but I didn't have a problem with it. But when I got to the New Testament notes, I was seeing all this replacement theology. And I began to say, I'm disappointed in this Bible now. But it's not really the Bible, it's the commentary. And so the commentary is, a lot of times, a commentary that goes with a study Bible, you might have one scholar that does only one book.
Right.
And another scholar that will
That's
do
right.
the notes for another book of the Bible. And so, but I noticed that throughout the New Testament, that the commentary, I'm about halfway through the New Testament of this version, it's pretty standard replacement theology through the New Testament commentary of this particular version. But the thing is, the more I study over the years, the more I recognize it real quick. You know, I can just tell right off the bat this is replacement theology. That's not going to keep me from reading their other notes that would give me some insight.
Right.
And I can learn how to take the good and filter out the bad. And the more somebody is going to study, the more they're going to be able to do that.
Yes, I agree. And I think it's hard at the beginning for folks because you don't want to have to filter every single thing you want to learn. And so finding a good balanced teacher with the right perspective on the scriptures from God's perspective is just going to be essential. And I'm with you. It's very difficult to find just one source that you can go to and see that balance in a Bible.
Yeah. And I don't think we should settle for one source, even if we found the perfect source, because argument is essential.
Yes.
And, there are people that don't want to have any argument in their Bible studies. Well, to me, that is not, that's just, that doesn't help.
Well, it certainly doesn't reflect the culture in the days of Jesus.
Right.
There was argument, there was discussion, there was in these yeshiva moments of the disciples battling over this and that, and well, who do you say is the greatest? And you can even see that reflected in the gospel accounts.
Yes.
And certainly we know that from Jewish culture that was important. And that was what Jesus was around and influenced to some extent by. So we're back to talking about groups again. So it's important for somebody to be a part of a healthy group that will help them be accountable to one another and have a correct understanding of Scripture.
I agree.
How do they find that?
They have to seek it. They really have to look around for it. They could start by, in their own church, seeing if there is an Old Testament centered study. And they can also just kind of look around and ask people that they trust.
Scott Baland, it's good to have you. We need to have you back. We need to have more discussions. These are really vital to the health, I think, and the spirituality of believers, that they challenge themselves with these questions. They come to some point of a conclusion at the moment of how to progress in their walk with God. And that's what this is all about. That's what Israel TV Network is all about, to be honest with you. It's helping believers and non-believers come into a relationship, a deep relationship with God, respect for His words, His precepts, His how to walk in life, how to live, stand up with the Jewish people, be counted among them, and do the right thing with your life. It'll change the culture, it'll change our world. More importantly, it'll change you. And we so appreciate you being a part of Israel TV Network. Scott, thank you once again for being
Thank you,
on the
Rick.
set.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it too. And we'll see you next time on the interview. God bless. Shalom, shalom.